specialty is working with patients with cancer and their families and support people. And so I've been doing that for more than 20 years now. And one of the things that really strikes me about talking to people and to people that love people with brain cancer is just what a difficult area it is emotionally, and how we don't often talk about the difficult emotions very well. And so part of what I'm here to do this afternoon is try and do that. And it's a difficult time to talk because everyone's got a full belly, and probably half of you want to have a nap. I'll try and stay awake if you all do, all right? So what I want to talk about today, firstly, is, why a psychologist? And this is a reaction that people often have if it's suggested to them that they might want to see a psychologist. I'm not crazy. Nobody said you are, and it's important to remember that. My job, this is very different to a lot of the psychology I did in the first 10 years of my career. This is not about working with crazy people. This is about working with normal people who are struggling to deal with one of the most difficult pieces of information they've ever been given, and that is that they have a cancer. And one of the most difficult cancers is brain cancer. Because while it hurts our brain, it also hurts our heart. And that's a really important thing for us to recognise. And so one of the things that I always like to try and just investigate with people is what's the emotional impact of having this disease and how are you coping with it? And so you can see, one of the things that comes up again and again for people is this cancer of all the cancers is actually the only one that happens in the bit of us that is us. This is my body. This is me. And that's often how we think about it. It's the bit that drives us. It's the bit that tells the rest of our body what to do. It's the bit that connects with all of the other pieces of us. And so what happens when that bit is actually directly impacted by a cancer is different than what happens for any of the other cancers. And so one of the things to think about, and the little diagram I put in the middle is, I'm not going to talk to in any depth at all because I'm not a doctor, but I do know that's brain. And all of those little coloured bits of the brain do different things. They're all bits that we can clearly identify. And look, we still, of all of our bodily organs, the brain is the one we know the least about. But we know that all of those specific bits do specific things. And so all of those specific bits can be a bit that have tumour in them. And so all of those things can't help but be impacted when we have something foreign that grows in our head. And that's one of the main reasons that it's so hard. But I think as a person with brain cancer, one of the things that often makes it really difficult is our brain is not very good at being aware of what's going wrong in it. It's very good at going, no, we're good, we're fine, we're good, it's all good here, nope, nothing to worry about, don't look at me, all good, until it gets to the point where it goes, I can't do this anymore. And it has a seizure, or we just lose it, as some people will say. It's really one of those tricky things that happens. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is how do we actually recognise what's happening in the bit of ourself that is our awareness, but often has no awareness of itself. One of the other things I want to acknowledge is just that the world of how we treat brain cancer is changing enormously and rapidly. And I know for most of you in this room, not rapidly enough. But for the clinicians that work in the field, it's changing at a pace that we struggle to keep up with sometimes. And that's really exciting. And I didn't actually see Craig do anything other than answer questions, but I'm sure you got some of his passion and his excitement about all of the stuff that's changing in this field. And it is exciting. What I see from that, though, is not just the excitement. What I see is people who are struggling to deal with the side effects of these medications and what these new treatments actually do to us and how they make us feel. Because one of the assumptions that we have is if I'm sick and I get a treatment, then that makes me feel better. And that often doesn't happen in cancer. Because I don't feel like I'm sick. Somebody tells me I'm sick, really sick, and they give me a treatment that makes me feel like I'm sick. And so psychologically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so it's just important to remember, while it's exciting that we can keep people alive for much longer than we could when I started working with brain cancer, the quality of life is something that it's really important that we learn to talk about and think about. And Lindy and Erica, who are talking after me, will talk about that as well, because the supportive care that palliative care provides is all about quality of life, particularly your bowels. I'm just saying that. So one of the things that happens is that the burden of treatment can often end up being the thing that's harder to deal with than the actual cancer itself in some cases. So I'm just acknowledging that. But all of this, you know, the most important thing we need to do is think about how can we best care for ourselves and care for each other. And so if I've got a brain cancer, how do I look after myself? As I said before, it's tricky because if my brain's not working properly, I'm probably not going to notice that. So how do I flag to myself, well, I probably need to do a little bit about this because I don't even know anything's wrong. One of the things that I think, and it's difficult having this conversation, and I often have the conversation, particularly the conversation about, but I know I would be really safe driving. You know, and that was one of the things that Liz said, yep, you would be 99.9% of the time. But it's that tiny chance that something can go wrong that we have to be conscious of. How do we bring some awareness to when we're not aware? And one of the nice examples, I think, is a thing that's called hemispatial neglect that can happen when you have cancer that's growing mainly in your parietal lobe, which is sort of the bit of our brain where we bring all of the information about attention that we get from all of our senses and we put it together. And so you can see the drawing here of the clock and the house and the cat. And so this is a test that you can use to look at whether someone's experiencing hemispatial neglect. And if this happens in the right side of our brain, we ignore the left side. It's just like it doesn't exist. And so this is what happens when you ask someone with hemispatial neglect to draw and copy the clock and the house and the cat. You can see that there's just a whole section on the left side that's just not there. And so they do your drawing and you say to them, and is this complete? And they say yes. And it's only when you point it out that most people are able to go, oh, actually there is something missing. But we don't often do tests like that in real life. And we don't often get challenged to see that. But I'm putting that up there more just to say there are subtle changes that happen in our brain that we truly are not aware of. And that is one of the things that is really psychologically difficult and may even cause arguments between people sometimes. Has that ever happened? Has anyone ever had maybe, a couple of discussions around that in the room? So it's really hard for us, just as human beings at any point, when someone says we're doing something wrong or we're thinking something wrong. You know, who in the room is good when someone comes up and challenges and goes, no, that's wrong. Who's good at going, oh, sorry, okay. Not very many of us. We go, yes, no, I am right. So ask yourself, and I'm pointing to the carers in the room here as well, think about the fact of what happens for you when the person that you love is making a mistake. And at first it's a bit, oh, I don't know how to raise this. And then what happens, it becomes a bit, oh, actually this is just really annoying. And I still don't want to raise it though. And so then how does it usually get raised? Maybe as an argument. Or in a negative way. And so one of the things that's really important is just to think about how we can actually begin to converse with each other about what's happening when these changes are happening, and how do we have the conversations with each other about the changes that we see. If I have a brain tumour, how do I try and remember that if someone tells me I'm getting something wrong or I'm making a mistake, they're probably not doing it to be awful. But how do I also remember to try and not do that if I'm the carer when I'm feeling frustrated and tired? Because that's when it comes out, when we're exhausted. And so thinking about those things are some of the things that we can really be aware of, you know. Looking after ourselves when we have a brain tumour is difficult because we need to recognise that we need it. But there's also a lot of people who will tell you that they're sorry they can't help you. But one of the things that you can do, and that there's really clear evidence about, is tapping into some form of exercise, some form of moving your body. And the reason that that's helpful is there's multiple reasons. And this is a growing area across oncology. When I started 20 years ago, we used to tell people on chemotherapy to rest, don't do too much, no strenuous exercise, just go home and lie around and do nothing. And now we say go and get on an exercise bike straight after you've had your intravenous chemo. Who would have thought? We know that exercise helps with reducing fatigue, and I'm sure all of you in the room have experienced fatigue that's related to cancer, whether it's through your own cancer or through someone you love going through it. It reduces the toxicities of treatment. It seems to help our body actually process treatments better. It improves our tolerance to treatment, so we're more likely to turn up and get through our treatment and complete our treatment if we engage with exercise. And there's increasing evidence that it actually increases our survival. If doctors could put exercise in a tablet, they would. And they probably will take it themselves as well. But it also helps us with our mental health. It's shown that it can reduce that cognitive fog that happens with that you know, we used to call it chemo brain, that feeling of not being able to remember things for any of the postmenopausal women in the room. Apparently it helps with this as well, but it improves our mood, so it reduces anxiety and depression, and it improves our sleep. I think for this group particularly, we know that exercise also helps our brain to develop new pathways. And some of you might have heard people talking about neuroplasticity and that ability that our brain has to learn how to do things, making new connections after it's been interrupted by surgery or treatment. And so we know that people that are exercising are better at building these new neural pathways. And it helps the brain to overcome the damage that we do both when there's cancer growing in it, but when we treat that cancer as well. So they're pretty compelling reasons to exercise. One of the biggest problems with exercise is we all know the compelling reasons to exercise, but we actually have to do it. And so one of the things that can be most beneficial is identifying ways that you can begin to move your body. Don't call it exercise, because that's like dieting. I don't do either of those things. But how can I become a little more physically active? How can I engage with some of the programs that are out there that can help me feel better? I'm going to talk about carers as well. And I've got a little disclaimer here. I've been a carer. This is a photo of my gorgeous sister-in-law and brother-in-law. So my partner's brother and sister both died of cancer. Peter had advanced lung cancer and Lynn had metastatic breast cancer, and we cared for both of them at home. And we had them living with us through the process of their treatment as well. Peter was diagnosed with a very late stage lung cancer, so that he was diagnosed and died over a 4-month period. And Lynn had actually had breast cancer for 14 years when she died. So I get being a carer. There's an irony in me talking about self-care for carers, because I did none when I was a carer. I exhausted myself, I didn't keep up contacts with my social people, you know, I took on too much responsibility. I am the case study of, you know, how to fail at caring. Apparently I was okay at it from other people's perspective, but I failed myself as a carer. And so I'm going to try and encourage you to not be like me. Often the caring can be more complex than being sick. When you're actually sick yourself, you have goals, you have treatment that you can elect to have, you can do things about it. When the person that you love is going through the cancer and the treatment, you can't do anything other than hopefully what they want you to do. You can't fix the person that you love, and that breaks your heart. You can't engage with the teams in the same way, and you don't have the same sense of purpose. So the mental health of carers is often worse than the mental health of people with cancer themselves. So I'm just flagging that for you. It's important to remember that. if we don't look after ourselves, we're not good carers. Because we're too tired. And the night that Peter was dying, I actually was too tired when I was giving him some medication. And there was something that went wrong because of that, and it didn't increase his suffering at all. But it was a thing that wouldn't have happened if I'd been resting enough, if I'd been accepting the help that other people were offering. And often that can be a tricky and difficult thing to do. But as a carer as well, one of the simplest things that you can do for yourself is to tap into those benefits of exercise. Because they work for us whether we're actually dealing with the cancer ourselves or whether we're caring for someone. If you're located in Newcastle, we have the Cadence Centre, which is out at Warrabrook. We've got Ethos Health, which is at Lake Macquarie. We've got a number of rehab gyms that you can tap into, and the majority of them will allow two people to come in and practice together. So you can actually do that together. It can be a really useful way of getting out of the house, of getting some exercise, of tapping into that. Again, the problem is you have to actually do the exercise, but look, you know, honestly, once you start it, it turns into places like Ethos and the Cadence Centre have a really social vibe about them as well, and so you actually connect with other patients and their carers that are going through the cancer. That can be really important. But really the most important thing is that we just think about how can we actually provide that support to each other. Because brain cancer doesn't happen in isolation. You know, it doesn't, I've never met a family where everything was just absolutely fantastic and perfect and suddenly there was a brain cancer. It happens in the middle of all the other stuff. You know, at the moment we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and that's created a whole degree of complexity around how we relate to each other, what we can do, when we can do it. Who's feeling slightly anxious in their tummy at the moment about what's happening in Melbourne? You know, like it changes our sense of safety in the world. And so just recognising those things and thinking about what are the things that we can do to deal with a situation in our family that is really difficult and really complicated. And some days are easy and some days are awful. How do we talk to each other about it? How do we actually acknowledge that this is really a struggle and that bits of it we do together and bits of it we have to do separately? We can't always do everything as a twin pair or as a family. But the things that we can do are, you know, it's important that we think about how we spend our time. Because one of the things that any cancer, and brain cancer particularly does, is it just plants a seed for us around the fact that there's this thing that we all have. And it's called mortality. And most of us spend most of our lives ignoring that fact. Because we know that it happens, you know, like that we die, and we know that it can happen before you're ready, and we know that that can be through something unexpected or a tragedy, and we know that that tragedy can be brain cancer, and we know that that happens to other people. And actually finding out that you're other people is hard. And trying to think about what can we actually do to just recognise the value of the day that we have today. Without necessarily all the time thinking about the context of why I'm thinking about this, but how do we spend our time well? How do we make sure we spend time with the people we love? How do we record the time that we spend with the people that we love? How do we think about making memories? Some of the best memories we made with my sister-in-law Lynn were probably 6 weeks before she died, and we went to Queensland and we did all the theme parks, which is what she wanted to do, and we spent about $16,000 buying every single photo that they sell you at the theme parks. And I look like I have an intellectual disability in every single one of them because I'm not pulling your face, it's great. But we actually spent some really good time just doing simple things around the house as well. And we didn't necessarily set out to do those things, but we just tried to remember to take photos. You know, we took little videos where we could. We just thought about the things that are important to us, you know. On days that you're feeling really tired and you cook and you feel that overwhelming sense of, I need to leave a thing or things for people that I love, one of the hardest things and simplest things at the same time you can do is actually just print a few of your favourite photos and just write on the back of it the name of the person you want to give that photo to and what your memory of that moment is. Because if all of you think of someone that you've loved and lost, and think about if you could pick up the photo of the two of you and turn over and see in their handwriting their memory. Can you feel that connection? It's a really powerful thing to do. Don't try and do 20 of them at once, because it's a really emotionally exhausting thing to do as well. But there are little simple things that we can do that tack us into that potential reality, but don't keep us there. You can't think about that all the time. Our brains are not built that way. Our brains are built to live on denial island. I'm just going to sit there and everything's going to be fine. Thank you very much. But in those little moments where it comes to you that actually today is precious, and who I'm talking to is precious, and what I'm thinking and doing is precious, just how do I use that time well? Talking to someone like me can sometimes be helpful. I don't do that much. I really just listen to people. We don't get a chance to talk to people that listen very often. But some of the work that I often do within the brain cancer area is actually work with families as well as individuals. And so actually talking to everybody about what's happening and how do we deal with this and how do we deal with how unfair this is and how unexpected and what do we do next. So don't be afraid to talk to someone like me. If someone suggests that to you, they're not saying that because they think you're not coping. They're just suggesting someone that could give you an extra hand. Sometimes they're just suggesting someone that's happy to talk about difficult stuff, because that's my job. The things that you can do together, all important family stuff, friend stuff, but it's also important to do the things you can for yourself. And that might include individually spending time with family and friends. Making sure you touch base with the people that love you. Having a rest. Take a rest break when you need it, and that's not just if you have a brain cancer, that's if you're a carer as well. Just stop, just breathe. It doesn't have to be a long rest, but just give yourself a break every now and then. Try and think about how doing things apart actually meets everyone's needs. Because not one of us in this room can provide all of the things that one other of us in this room need. We only know that stuff ourselves. And so just doing things on your own can also help you think about the other things that you want to do, the connections that you want to make with other people. And again, one of the things, visiting a psychologist. So either coming in to see someone like me as a family group or coming in on your own. I'll often see family groups together and then individually. Get to know everybody that way. But just think about accessing the support that you can get, because one of the hardest things, and we're so lucky to have the Mark Hughes Foundation because they provide supports and amazing coordinators that just help navigate you through what is, a really, really difficult place. But please, one of the most important things you can learn to do is recognise the power. Think about what it feels like when someone lets you help them. How nice does it feel when you can actually help someone you care about? That nice, warm, satisfied glow. And yet when we're in the position of needing to receive the help, we reject it. No, we're good. We're fine, thanks. If every one of you just thinks the next time someone offers to help, if I actually accept this help, I'm giving that person the gift of that warm feeling of helping somebody. That would be one change that will help everybody in the room's mental health. It will help the people that love people to feel better. But it also gives us a little rest and it helps us to care for ourselves. So please don't underestimate the gift that you give the people that love you when you allow them to help you. All right, I think I'm going to stop there because otherwise I'll just keep talking all afternoon and I'll go over time. We've got a panel discussion after I finish, so I'm happy for people to ask questions, and I'll be hanging around afterwards, so if you want to come up and have a chat. To all the people I know in the audience, it's great to see all those faces. Thank you.